as an artist, I was constantly getting gentrified out of buildings, out of neighborhoods. It was a common story with artists, not just in Chicago, but all over the world. And so it was, how do you change this scenario so that that doesn't keep happening? And so I went to work for a developer of a historic building in the center of Wicker Park and learned about community development. What I got out of it was a studio on the upper level of his 13-story building.
Mm-hmm.
And got to develop an arts organization and a gallery and write grants, get a feasibility study, do artist housing, using affordable housing model, but educating artists in as a collective and how to make decisions, so that one of our goals was, how do we get rid of the extraneous expenses that goes into development? What kinds of stuff can we do ourselves? So that was marketing. So our goal was to build community of people first, find a building, figure out how to afford it, get the financing, hire professionals to help us put this package together. So I've been living in an artist condo community for 18 years. And I've done two other artist housing projects that are rental, which isn't my preference. And so we're working on developing a third. So because we did this pre-internet, we're looking at creating a toolbox showing artists and communities how to do this, how to collectively make decisions, how to share, what kind of scale is affordable and sustainable, and how you make the decisions in order to have control over it. So we look at condos, we look at co-ops, we also look at a non-for-profit owned model, depending on opportunities in the community. So that's what I do.
Are you involved with, have you been involved, I should say, in tenant related organizations or collaborated with them? Or has that been part of your journey?
Involved with what kinds of organizations?
Tenant supporting in terms of renting and whatnot?
You know, my partner and I both went through affordable housing training with community development community. So I'm well aware of organizations that either offer training in metro tenant rights. I also work with community development organizations that work in partnership to create affordable housing. All of that is financed with tax credits, and it denies ownership. So we're looking at a different model.
So you think ownership is ultimately the best way to wind up because it's the safest?
It's the only thing that gives you sustainability. Yeah.
So that sounds like it's been one of your takeaways from the moves that you've made, is that I'm making a bit of a presumption here, but do you not have any hope in a rental model as opposed to an ownership model?
Well, I do believe in a rental model. If the only access to support is tax credits, that is, a non-for-profit can own it, but it denies control by the renters. You know, somebody else gets the tax credits and they usually put it in the hand. You know, there's a lot of lawyers making money off of that. And so
talk about Laura, you can talk about the Brownsville Artist Loss and how Near Northwest Arts Council, what you do
Right,
as a minority owner. And I'm Alpha, Michael,
Hi, Alpha.
and I'm a resident artist here at the Brownsville Artist Loft. I don't, she had wanted it to be a co-op and asked a few of the artists that had the kind of jobs that where they can invest in as a co-op, but this is a rental model.
right.
So you can talk more about that, but I'm one of the artists that reside here and the work that she and other investors did to get this development.
Mhm.
Right. So that was a commercial development endeavor with a community-based development team. But they didn't have enough money. They didn't have deep enough pockets to suit the city, who was a development partner. So a contractor, construction company / developer became 51% owner of the project, which they took control. They made the most money. But as a non-for-profit, I worked at marketing, educating the artists, and managing the building for the first year, to kind of cultivate that communication amongst the artists in the commercial gallery on the first floor. But the owners prefer a commercial property management company that's more ruthless and doesn't care about the artist community. They didn't care about marketing the retail space to the community. So there was like a real conflict in values because they had the deep pockets that made the city feel more comfortable. So so yeah, my model is to organize the community because artists have a ton of skills. When we went around the table and talked about what other jobs we had besides being artists and what we knew how to do, and we took a list of what was needed in order to develop a commercial property, we covered all of the skills necessary except for maybe one or two. And that was, we could keep books, but we weren't the best loan packaging experts. And so, and we didn't have the best legal minds, but we could cover every other base. So that was an interesting aha moment amongst the artists, that individually we didn't have enough income to own property, but collectively we had the experience, the professional knowledge, a track record of paying rent, etc., and that we could afford a much bigger project than we even envisioned. So that's where I'm coming from. I like to build on that knowledge.
Right. Have you found, it sounds like from your mention of the city, which I assume includes city planners, which are hugely important, in this process, that they were, at least the ones you've experienced, the planners and the city in general that you've worked with or engaged with, are ultimately not, are more comfortable, as you put it, with the with money. Why wouldn't they be, right? I mean, in other words, they're not open-minded to, well, what if the city looked like this? What if it was more democratic? What if it was, controlled by the people, that kind of thing.
Right. What was interesting when we were doing this, and this is 20 years ago, the commissioner of housing and the head of planning and others at the top said, we couldn't possibly entertain this idea. We have people with much greater needs. After all, artists choose to be poor on purpose, was their kind of logic. But what was very interesting was that everybody in mid-management loved the idea because everybody knew an artist that was having trouble kind of keeping things going through a relative or friend or whatever. So everybody had a common experience. They
Mhm.
also saw that what we were designing that was owned, it was a mixed use building. So we were talking about anywhere from 15 to 20 residential units and 5 commercial units, which were going to be owned by non-for-profits. And so they saw the link between connections to the community, jobs, economic development, affordable housing. They saw the logic of that, where the
Right.
guys at the top didn't, and
Right.
they still don't.
And ultimately, do you see any hope in the middle management, as you refer to them, as having enough power to, enact those kinds of legislations, or is it ultimately that they have to persuade, it's an ongoing struggle to try to persuade their bosses?
Right now, there's a lot of money that's going towards community investment on under invested communities. So they still like big projects that with tried and true big scale, that they can point to and say, we did that. And maybe I was 20 years ahead of my time, but they're starting to realize that grassroots investment is important. So
Mhm.
I think what we have to do is just keep educating folks into how you make decisions. And what we're creating is maybe a $5 or $8 million investment, but it's owned by the people who live and work in the building. And so they're understanding that better.
Mhm.
Plus, I've
Good.
got a building that I can point to that's 18 years old and
Mhm.
created a lot of wealth for the folks that live there. So
Mm,
it's successful.
that's great. Congrats.
Thank you.
Yeah. Um, yeah, well, I'd be happy to. Do you have? I mean, this is a lot for me to take in. All at once, but it's very interesting, and I wonder if you have any kind of website or documentation or whatever, what articles, anything that I could sort of look over,
Sure.
later and get a better sense of, get my hands around it better. Yeah, that's
Right.
great. That's
So
great.
our website is nnwac.org, stands for Near Northwest Arts Council.org. I could send you an email with the
Mhm.
listing. And so I welcome any questions. I have feasibility studies, business plans for formas in that I can share as PDFs. I don't publish those on the website, but I can send them to you easy.
Great. Here, I'm putting my email in the chat. Of a community land trust.
I really wanted to do land trust 20 years ago,
Mhm.
but they were kind of an unknown quantity. What we ended up creating was a limited equity cooperative.
Mhm.
And no, we didn't create a limited equity cooperative. The city wouldn't give us money unless we were a condo community.
Mm.
So, but a community land trust is absolutely, now it's understood in Chicago, and they're doing it for single family homes. And I think that they're ready to accept it as part of our next proposal, which will totally, you can create a condo community or a cooperative, but there's still, what we ran into is problems with property taxes and unrealistic expectations relative to our property. And we couldn't run non-for-profit organizations out of our, what was designed as commercial space because the taxes were so high. And so a community land trust would protect, that is a recognized commodity in Chicago as far as tax assessment. So absolutely, we would use it.
Great. Great. Well, thanks so much for telling me about this. And Liza, thank you so much for including me. And yeah, we'll keep the conversation going. I'll try to get a better sense of digest more of this information so I have a better sense of it, and we can talk
Sure.
more. Great.
Thanks.
Thank you. Take care.
All right.